death mystery. We are now breaking news in the Elena Moore death mystery. We are now learning she reportedly made some cryptic posts in the months leading up to her disappearance. These very emotional messages were apparently posted to a second Instagram account that she ran. In a May post acquired by TMZ, Moore seemingly wrote, "Now all I feel is this exhausting hatred sitting inside my chest because of you. I never wanted to become this person. I never wanted to look at someone I once loved with disgust and resentment. But you turned my life into something painful, something heavy, something I now have to heal from every single day. I hate what you did to me. I hate the memories that won't leave me alone. And more than anything, I hate that a part of me still mourns the person I thought you were." In March, Moore reshared another lengthy message that read in part, "The war is over." She said she was genuinely happy someone was no longer in her life. The message continued, "Everything feels lighter, like a weight I carried for so long is finally gone." And in December of last year, she posted about what she described as a dehumanizing heartbreak. Now, friends are speaking out. One friend telling TMZ that Moore had been cutting toxic people out of her life and that her disappearance was, quote, absolutely shocking because this was out of character for her.
For days, Elena Moore was a missing person. Then she was found, and everyone expected the autopsy to finally explain what happened to her. But instead, the first results left behind something even heavier than an answer. No obvious trauma, no clear cause, no final certainty about how her life ended. And that is what makes this case so difficult to sit with, because somewhere between the last time Elena was seen and the moment her body was recovered, something went terribly wrong. Now the silence around her death feels almost louder than the answers investigators have given so far. So the question is no longer just what happened to Elena Moore. The question is this: how does someone disappear into the night, leave behind a trail of unanswered questions, and still die in a way that refuses to explain itself? If you want to understand what is really happening in this case, stay with me, because what we are looking at now is not just a missing person story that ended. It is a death investigation that is still unfolding, and the truth is still being tested. On June 17, authorities located a body in a wooded area near Old Cherokee Road and Northlake Drive in Lexington, South Carolina. The body was later identified by the Lexington County coroner as Elena K. Moore. At first, officials were careful. They said the body appeared to fit the description of the missing woman investigators had been searching for, but they did not rush to make a final conclusion before the formal identification process was complete. That caution mattered, because once a case reaches this point, every word matters, every statement matters, and every detail can shape the way the public sees the truth. Then came the autopsy update, and that is where the case changed again. The preliminary autopsy did not reveal signs of traumatic injury. Officials said there were no visible injuries that immediately pointed to a cause of death. Reports described no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no strangulation, no blunt force trauma, and no other obvious external injuries. That does not mean the case is solved. It means the body did not give up the answer easily, and that distinction is everything, because a preliminary autopsy is not the final word. It is the first layer, the first examination, the first attempt to understand what happened based on visible findings and initial forensic observation. What it cannot do is tell the whole story by itself. It cannot finish toxicology. It cannot interpret every microscopic change in tissue. It cannot, on its own, explain a death that may have involved substances, medical factors, or anything else that does not leave an immediate external mark. That is why this update matters so much, because the autopsy did not close the case. It opened a larger one, and for the public, that absence of a quick answer has become its own kind of fuel. People hear no trauma and immediately start reaching for explanations: poisoning, overdose, medical crisis, foul play, accident, mental health emergency. The problem is that none of those theories can be confirmed just because the first examination did not show visible injury. That is where the investigation has to slow down. That is where science takes over from speculation. And that is where the truth usually lives. On June 11, Elena Moore was last seen alive. According to public reporting, she signed in at Planet Fitness around 6:40 p.m. that evening. Surveillance later captured her walking near the Publix area at around 9:17 p.m., still wearing the same clothing. That time gap matters, because it is one of the last known windows in which investigators have not yet publicly explained where she was or what she was doing. And that gap is where all the questions begin. What happened in those hours? Did she go somewhere off camera? Did she encounter someone? Did she become disoriented? Did she leave on her own and simply keep walking into danger? Or did something else happen that has not been publicly revealed yet? Those are the questions that now hang over the case. And every unanswered minute between the last sighting and the discovery only makes the mystery feel heavier. Once Elena was reported missing, the search expanded. Local law enforcement, search teams, and volunteers moved through the area trying to find her. Then came the tip that narrowed the focus. Police said a citizen tip helped direct the search into the wooded area where the body was later located. That detail is important because it shows how much missing person cases can depend on one phone call, one observation, one person deciding to speak up at the right time. Without that tip, the search may have looked very different, and without the search, the body may not have been found as quickly. That is one of the hardest realities in cases like this. Sometimes the answer is not found because investigators suddenly know more. Sometimes it is found because someone in the public finally remembers something small enough to seem insignificant until it is too late. By the time the body was located, the case had already begun shifting from a missing person investigation into a death investigation. SLED became involved, and the coroner continued to handle the forensic side of the case. That alone tells you this was not being treated as routine. When a state investigative agency is involved quickly, it usually means the case demands a level of scrutiny beyond what a local department handles alone. Not because an answer is obvious, but because the answer is not. And that is what makes this case feel so unsettled. The public wants certainty. The family wants certainty. And investigators right now are still waiting for the science to speak. Because that is what the preliminary autopsy cannot do. It can tell you what is not immediately visible. It can rule out certain forms of trauma. But it cannot yet tell you what chemical, biological, or medical process may have caused death if no injury is apparent. That is why toxicology matters so much here. That is why tissue samples matter. That is why microscopic testing matters. Those results can reveal what the body is not showing on the surface. And in a case like this, the surface is only part of the story. A lot of people hear that and think the autopsy should have already given the answer. But forensic work is slower than public speculation. And sometimes that delay feels unbearable. Toxicology can take weeks, sometimes longer, especially when investigators are screening for a wide range of substances, checking for unusual compounds, and making sure nothing is missed. The important thing to understand is that delay is not the same as failure. A waiting period does not mean the investigation is stuck. It means the investigation is still working. And in a case where the first exam found no obvious trauma, the lab results become the real center of gravity. That is where the next answer is likely to come from, not from rumors. Not from social media. Not from assumptions built on incomplete knowledge, from the evidence, from the tests, from the body itself speaking through the language of science. And that is why this case keeps people watching. Because no matter how many theories appear online, none of them matter until the evidence confirms one. Now, what does no trauma actually mean in practical terms? It does not mean Elena died peacefully. It does not mean nothing happened to her. It does not mean she was not harmed. It simply means the autopsy did not reveal obvious external or structural injuries that immediately explained her death. That is a huge difference, because some deaths leave clear marks, others do not. Poisoning may leave little or no visible trauma. An overdose may leave little or no visible trauma. Certain medical events may leave little or no visible trauma. Some forms of asphyxiation may leave minimal signs, and sudden cardiac events can leave the body looking, at least at first glance, almost untouched. So when people online say there was no trauma, therefore it must be poisoning, they are jumping ahead of the evidence. And when others say there was no trauma, so it must have been natural, they are doing the same thing from the opposite direction. The autopsy does not support either conclusion yet. It only tells us that the answer is not obvious. And that is exactly why investigators are being cautious, because a rushed conclusion can ruin a case. And once a bad theory takes hold publicly, it can overwhelm the facts before the facts even have a chance to breathe. That is why the word pending matters so much in this story. Cause of death pending, toxicology pending, further testing pending, manner of death still under review. Those words are not empty. They are the space where the actual answer is supposed to arrive. And right now that space is still open. The timeline before Elena disappeared is one of the most important parts of this case, not because it tells the whole story, but because it gives investigators the frame they are working inside. June 11, Planet Fitness. 6:40 p.m. Then later, surveillance footage in the Publix area around 9:17 p.m. That is the known path. Everything else depends on what happened in between. And that is where the mystery deepens, because the public can see the last known movement but not the full route. They can see that she was on foot, they can see the clothing, they can see the time, but they cannot see the full chain of events that led from one camera to the next. There is a difference between being seen and being understood. And in this case, the footage gives investigators one but not the other. That is why the final hours matter so much. Not because they are dramatic, because they are incomplete. And incomplete timelines are where cases either break open or stay unresolved for months. As the search continued, the wooded area near Lakeside Middle School became the center of attention. That is where the body was ultimately found. That is where the story shifted. And that is where the public began to realize that this was not going to be a case with quick closure. The coroner later confirmed the identification. Then the preliminary autopsy came back with no obvious trauma. And suddenly the story that people thought might be straightforward became something much harder to define. Because now the question is no longer whether Elena was found. The question is how she died, and that question has not yet been answered. What makes that even more difficult is how emotionally loaded unexplained deaths can become online. People hate uncertainty. They want a villain. They want a clean explanation. They want the story to make sense in a way that feels complete. But real investigations do not work that way. Real investigations start with fragments. They start with partial evidence. They start with a body, a timeline, a few sightings, and a set of unanswered questions that only get sharper the longer the final results take. That is where we are right now, in the waiting, in the pause between discovery and explanation. And that pause can be dangerous because it gives speculation room to grow. But speculation is not proof, it is not evidence, it is not a conclusion. And in a case like this, the responsible thing is to stay with what is verified. What is verified is this: Elena Moore was last seen alive on June 11. The cause of death remains pending, and the investigation is still active. That is the core of the update. Everything else is still being tested, and that is why this case has not settled. Now, if you are wondering what investigators are likely focusing on behind the scenes, the answer is probably the same set of questions the public is asking, only with access to evidence the public does not have. They are likely reviewing phone records. They are likely looking at digital movement data. They are likely reviewing surveillance footage from businesses along the route. They are likely comparing witness statements. They are likely waiting on the toxicology panel and tissue analysis. And they are likely doing all of that while resisting the pressure to announce something before the evidence is ready. That last part is harder than it sounds. Because once a case starts getting public attention, every delay gets interpreted as secrecy. Every silence feels like hiding. Every incomplete answer feels suspicious. But that is often not how investigations work. Sometimes silence means caution. Sometimes caution means they do not yet know enough. And sometimes the most honest thing law enforcement can say is that they are still waiting for the evidence to tell them what happened. That is not the kind of answer the public likes, but it is the kind of answer serious investigations often require. For Elena's family, that waiting is the hardest part because they do not just want a result, they want truth. They want certainty. They want the final piece that explains why this happened and what it means. And right now they are still in the painful space where the facts are real but the explanation is not. That kind of uncertainty does something to people. It changes the grief, it changes the questions, it changes the way every new detail lands. Because when there is no confirmed cause of death, every possibility feels heavier, and the mind starts filling in the blanks with its own fears. That is why cases like this echo so deeply, not because people love mystery, but because mystery is what remains when the facts stop just short of closure. So here is the truth as it stands now. The preliminary autopsy did not solve Elena Moore's case. It did not give the public a final answer. It did not confirm a cause of death. It did not reveal visible trauma that would immediately explain what happened. What it did do was narrow the path. It told investigators what they cannot yet see. It told them that the next layer of answers is likely in the lab, and it told the rest of us that this story is still being written by evidence that has not yet been fully returned. That is why this case still matters. That is why people are still watching, and that is why the silence around Elena's death feels so unsettling. Because when a body is found, people expect the story to stop, but sometimes the real story begins there. And sometimes the most important answers are the ones that take the longest to arrive. Right now the case is still in that waiting period, the space between discovery and explanation, the space between what was seen and what was confirmed, the space where rumor grows but truth is still being tested, and somewhere inside that testing process is the answer to what happened to Elena Moore. When that answer comes, it may change everything. Until then, the only thing left to do is stay close to the facts. Because the facts are the only thing this case has fully given us, and even they are not finished speaking yet. If you want to stay updated as soon as new information is released, make sure you are subscribed, because this is not the end of the story, it is the point where the evidence finally has to finish it.